He will never say this out loud. He might not even realize it about himself. But there is one exact shift, one specific change in the way you show up that makes an avoidant man's whole nervous system stand down. Most people spend years trying to reach him and never find it. A few stumble onto it by accident and can't explain why he suddenly softened. Today, you're going to understand exactly what that shift is and why it works on nearly every avoidant man alive. What I'm about to walk you through is not a manipulation tactic, and it isn't a trick you perform to control someone. It's something rooted in how the brain decides whether closeness is safe or dangerous. Once you understand this mechanism, you will never read his distance the same way again. You'll stop taking it personally, and you'll finally know what to do with it. Here's a question worth sitting with before we go further. What if the very thing you've been doing to get closer to him is the exact thing keeping him locked away? Stay with me, because the answer changes everything about how you approach this. To understand why an avoidant man melts, you first have to understand what he's actually running from. He is not running from you. He is running from a feeling. Somewhere early in his life, closeness got tangled up with danger. Maybe it was a parent who loved inconsistently, warm one day and distant the next, so connection always felt unpredictable. Or maybe it was a household where needing something made you a burden, where independence was praised and vulnerability was quietly punished. Maybe it was one specific moment, forgettable to everyone else, where he learned that opening up costs more than it gives back. That lesson didn't stay in childhood. It moved into his body. It became a reflex, wired in long before he ever had the words to question it. Psychologists who study emotional regulation often describe the nervous system the way an engineer describes a circuit. When a threat appears, real or imagined, the amygdala fires before the thinking brain even catches up. For most people, a raised voice or a slammed door sets off that alarm. For an avoidant man, intimacy itself can set it off. Warmth can set it off. Being truly seen, truly known, can trigger it just as powerfully as any physical danger. His body doesn't reliably tell the difference between a threat to his safety and a threat to his independence. Both get flagged the same way. Both get met with the same ancient response: retreat. This is why closeness so often produces the opposite of what you'd expect from someone who claims to care. You lean in and he leans back. You show affection and he grows quiet. You try to talk about where things stand, and something in him quietly shuts the door before the conversation even begins. It feels personal. It rarely is. It's a survival strategy running on autopilot, built years before you ever met him, triggered by circumstances that have nothing to do with your worth. Here is where most people go wrong, and I want you to really sit with this part, because it's the hinge the whole pattern turns on. When he pulls away, the instinct is to chase, to ask what's wrong, to send another message, to try harder to be understood, to explain yourself more clearly, to prove that you're safe. It feels like love. It feels like effort. It feels like the responsible thing to do in a relationship. But to a nervous system wired for avoidance, chasing rarely reads as love. It reads as pressure. And pressure is the exact signal that confirms his oldest fear, that closeness is dangerous, that he was right to protect himself in the first place. The chase doesn't draw him closer. It confirms the very belief that made him pull away to begin with. So what actually works? What is the one simple thing that changes this entire dynamic? It's not about giving up on him. It's not about pretending you don't care. And it's not about playing games or performing indifference you don't actually feel. It's about regulation. Specifically, it's about staying calm and warm while giving him room to come back on his own terms, without turning that space into a punishment, and without letting your own patience quietly curdle into resentment either. Let's talk about what this actually looks like in practice, because understanding the psychology only matters if you can turn it into something usable. An avoidant man's deactivating strategies, the mental habits that create distance and push people away, only work if there's something to push against. If you chase, there's resistance to create, and his system escalates its defenses in response. If you withdraw in anger or go cold as punishment, there's now a wound for him to defend against, and his guilt turns into more avoidance, because guilt itself can feel like a form of closeness he never agreed to and cannot control. But if you meet his distance with steady, unbothered warmth, something genuinely strange happens inside him. There's nothing left to push against, no wall worth defending, no fire to run from, just an open door that isn't chasing him through it, that isn't demanding he walk through it on anyone's timeline but his own. This is the exact moment his nervous system starts to recalibrate. Silence that isn't punishing is unfamiliar territory for him. Warmth that doesn't demand anything in return is unfamiliar too. And in this specific context, unfamiliar starts to register as safety instead of danger. That is the shift. That is the one simple thing. Not chasing and not shutting down either. Staying present, staying calm, and letting distance exist without treating it like an emergency that has to be fixed immediately. Daniel Goleman, one of the most respected voices in emotional intelligence research, describes something he calls the amygdala hijack, a moment when raw emotion overrides rational thought so completely that a person reacts before they even understand why they're reacting. An avoidant man goes through a version of this every single time intimacy starts to feel like too much, too fast, too close. His logical mind might genuinely want to stay connected. He might even consciously want to lean in. But his emotional brain, the older, faster, more primitive part of him, sounds the alarm anyway, overriding intention with instinct. The relationship stops being about logic in that moment. It becomes entirely about physiology, about a nervous system doing what it was trained to do long before he ever had a say in the matter. This is why arguing with an avoidant man rarely works the way you'd hope. You can lay out the most reasonable, well-organized case in the world for why he should open up, and it won't matter because you're speaking to the wrong part of his brain. The amygdala doesn't respond to logic. It responds to safety cues, tone of voice, body language, the absence of pressure, the presence of steadiness. These are the signals that actually land, long before words ever do. So when I say the one simple thing that makes him melt is staying regulated instead of reactive, I'm not talking about suppressing your feelings or faking calm while you're falling apart inside. I'm talking about learning to hold your own emotional center so firmly that his distance doesn't knock you off balance. That steadiness, without you even trying to manufacture it, becomes the safest thing he has ever experienced inside a relationship. Think about it from where he stands for a moment. His whole life, closeness has come with strings attached. Someone gets hurt, someone gets needy, someone gets controlling, and the relationship turns into a performance where he has to manage everyone else's emotions just to keep the peace and avoid conflict. Then he meets someone who can feel disappointed without falling apart, who can want more without demanding it on a deadline, who can sit with distance without turning it into a five-alarm crisis. To him, that is almost unbelievable. It goes against every internal model he carries about what intimacy costs him. And contradiction, when it happens gently and repeatedly over time, is exactly what starts to rewire an old belief that felt permanent. Daniel Goleman's research on emotional intelligence identifies 5 core components, and each one explains a different piece of what's happening between you and an avoidant man. Self-awareness is the first, and it's often the piece he's missing entirely. He may not consciously know that his coolness is fear wearing a disguise. He genuinely believes he's being logical, being independent, being fine, when underneath it all his body is simply protecting him from something that once felt unsafe. Self-regulation is the second, and it's the piece you are building in yourself right now by choosing steadiness over panic. Motivation is third, and it shows up as his internal pull toward connection, even when his behavior seems to contradict it completely. Empathy is the fourth, and here's something worth knowing. Avoidant men are often capable of deep empathy. They just struggle to stay present with it when it points back at their own vulnerability. And social skill, the fifth component, is what eventually allows 2 very different nervous systems to find a rhythm that works for both people, instead of one person constantly chasing and the other constantly retreating. When you understand these 5 pieces, his behavior stops looking like rejection and starts looking like exactly what it is, an underdeveloped skill set around emotional closeness, not a verdict on how lovable you are. That reframe alone changes how you experience every silence, every delayed reply, every moment he needs space. It stops feeling like evidence against you and starts feeling like information about him. Let's also talk about the anxious avoidance cycle, because if you've dated more than one avoidant man, or if this pattern feels painfully familiar even outside this specific relationship, there's a reason for that. People with anxious attachment styles are statistically drawn to avoidant partners more often than chance would predict, and it isn't a coincidence or bad luck. The anxious nervous system is wired to detect and respond to inconsistency, because somewhere in its own history, love was inconsistent too, and staying alert to unpredictability once felt like survival. The avoidant partner provides exactly the kind of intermittent closeness that keeps that old alarm system switched on, pulled close just enough to hope, pushed away just enough to panic. This isn't destiny, and it isn't a life sentence. But it does mean the work of becoming the regulated, secure presence we've been discussing benefits you far beyond this one relationship. It changes the entire pattern you're likely to keep running into until you interrupt it on purpose. Now let's speak plainly about the comment section for a second, because I want to know how many of you are recognizing this pattern in real time. If you've lived even one piece of what I just described, type the word recognize below, just that single word, nothing more. If this is your current relationship right now, today, this week, type the word today instead. And if you've already tried the chasing, already burned yourself out trying to prove your worth to someone who kept pulling back, type the word exhausted. I read these, and they shape exactly what I break down next in future videos. This is not an overnight process, and I want to be honest with you about that, because false promises don't help anyone heal faster. Nervous systems don't change because of one calm reaction on one good day. They change because of a pattern repeated steadily over weeks and months. Every time you respond to distance with grounded warmth instead of panic or coldness, you're adding one more piece of evidence to a new story his brain is slowly starting to believe. The story that says, maybe closeness doesn't have to cost me everything I have. Maybe I can come back without losing myself in the process. Let's talk about what this looks like day to day, because theory only matters if you can actually apply it in the moments that count. When he goes quiet, resist the urge to fill the silence with questions or explanations. Silence is not always rejection. Sometimes it's simply his system processing more emotional input than it knows how to handle all at once. Give it room to breathe without narrating every hour of it as proof he doesn't care. Keep living your life fully and visibly, not as a calculated move to make him jealous, but because a full, engaged life is genuinely more magnetic than an empty one spent waiting by the phone for a reply. When he does come back, and statistically he usually does, if the relationship has real substance underneath it, resist the urge to interrogate the absence. The instinct to ask where he's been, why he went quiet, what that silence meant about his feelings for you, feels justified in the moment. But to him, it can feel like walking back into a room and immediately being handed a bill for the time he spent away. Instead, meet him with the same steady warmth you would have offered if he'd never left at all. This doesn't mean ignoring real patterns of disrespect or accepting behavior that crosses genuine boundaries. It means learning to tell healthy space apart from actual mistreatment and responding to each of those situations appropriately without letting anxiety blur the line between the two. When you feel the urge to prove your value, to over-explain your feelings, to send the third message when the first two went unanswered for hours, pause before you act. That urge almost always comes from anxiety, not from a genuine desire to connect or communicate something useful. Anxiety is loud, and it convinces you that any action is better than stillness. But with an avoidant nervous system, stillness paired with warmth often communicates more safety than any paragraph of carefully chosen words ever could. There's also a physiological piece to this that most people never hear explained, and it changes everything once you understand it. Nervous systems don't just react to each other, they actually sync up with each other over time, a process researchers call co-regulation. When you're anxious and reactive, his nervous system picks up on that energy almost instantly, often before either of you consciously notices what's happening, and it responds by tightening further, bracing against the intensity. But when you are genuinely regulated, not performing calm but actually feeling it, his nervous system picks up on that too, and it starts to borrow from your steadiness, the way a shivering body borrows warmth from one standing close beside it. This isn't something you can fake convincingly for long, which is exactly why the internal work matters so much more than any specific script or set of words. Your calm has to be real because his body can tell the difference between real and performed, even when his conscious mind can't always name what it's sensing. This also explains why some people seem to carry a naturally calming presence, while others seem to stir up every room they walk into, regardless of intention. It isn't magic, and it isn't a fixed personality trait you either have or don't. It's a skill built through practice, through learning to notice your own anxiety rising and choosing, again and again, not to let it drive the moment. Every time you catch that urge to spiral and ground yourself instead, you are literally training your own nervous system toward more stability, which then becomes the very thing that makes you a safer person for an avoidant partner to be close to. There's a concept in attachment psychology called the secure base. It describes a person who can be leaned on without collapsing under the weight of someone else's inconsistency, whose steadiness doesn't shift based on how close or distant the other person happens to be acting in any given moment. Becoming that kind of presence isn't about suppressing your own needs or pretending you don't have them. It's about learning to hold your needs without letting them drive every single reaction. Ironically, the more secure and self-contained you become, the safer you become to an avoidant man, and the safer he feels around you, the more his defenses begin to lower on their own, without any pressure applied at all. I want to address something important here, because this idea can be twisted into something unhealthy if it's misunderstood, and I don't want that to happen to you. This isn't about becoming endlessly patient with someone who mistreats you or takes you for granted. It's not about accepting crumbs and calling it emotional intelligence, because that's not intelligence at all. That's self-abandonment wearing a calmer costume. A man who is avoidant but fundamentally respectful, who communicates even imperfectly, who shows effort even when it's clumsy or delayed, is in a completely different category from a man who uses distance as a weapon or disappears without any accountability at all. Emotional intelligence means being able to tell the difference clearly. Regulation is not the same thing as tolerating disrespect. Calm is not the same thing as accepting silence that never turns into anything real. If you take nothing else from everything I've said, take this one idea with you. The chase pushes him further into his shell every single time. Pressure confirms his oldest fears about what closeness costs. But steady, self-possessed warmth, Warmth that doesn't need his immediate response to feel secure in itself becomes the safest thing he has ever encountered in any relationship he's had. That steadiness is the one simple thing. Not begging, not withdrawing coldly to punish him, just staying present, staying calm, and keeping your own life full enough that his distance never has the power to empty it out for you. Let's go one layer deeper into why this actually changes behavior over time, because understanding the mechanism underneath it makes the whole thing so much easier to actually practice when it matters. Every relationship pattern gets reinforced through repetition, the same way any habit gets reinforced. If an avoidant man pulls away and chaos follows every single time, his brain files that away as proof that closeness leads straight to a loss of control. But if he pulls away and calm follows instead, if the world doesn't end, if you don't spiral into panic or punishment, if the door stays open without anyone standing guard at it begging him back, then his brain starts filing an entirely different kind of evidence. Slowly, distance stops feeling like the only safe option available to him. Slowly, staying starts to feel possible in a way it never did before. This is where patience becomes an active strategy rather than passive waiting. You are not doing nothing while this unfolds. You are actively showing, through consistent behavior over time, that you are a genuinely safe person to be close to. That demonstration speaks louder than any conversation about commitment or the future ever could, because it isn't a promise made in words. It's proof delivered through actions over and over until his nervous system finally believes it.